All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of the One More Thing podcast. And today we're joined with Pastor Larry.
It's good to be here.
We started the series on paradigm shifts, which I know you've been working on this one for a little while now. I was super excited, and I know people that knew this one was coming were really excited about it. So you started off the sermon or the teaching talking about this idea of paradigm shifts. And you kind of made this distinction between like, oh, I like vanilla ice cream, and now I thought I didn't like it, and now I do. Paradigm shifts seem to have a bigger implication than just a change in preference.
They do to me, and they do to Thomas Kuhn, who wrote the book, the scientific, the structure of scientific revolutions.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 1962. It's been revised several times. But that book, he basically is talking about a worldview. And it's not about a personal view.
Like a preference, yeah.
Yeah. But some people would argue, and I think justifiably, okay, you can define it however you want, but you can make it a personal paradigm shift, which some of us have. But when you have a worldview shift, it not only changes you, but it changes your community.
Right.
And there's the difference there, because at Suncoast, we're trying to help people within our community shift to a greater understanding or transition to a better understanding of a lot of things.
Yeah. I think a really important distinction is paradigm shifts usually are not welcome with open arms.
Well, neither is change.
Exactly.
And change is often, something that some of us really like to change. We change just for change's sake.
Right.
But there are others and who don't like to change as much. I just happen to marry one of those. So opposites attract. I like to change, and she's not so apt to change, but she has over the years. She just takes her time a little more than I do.
Yeah. And I think, you spoke about, when they discovered that the Earth was not the center of the universe. And that was Galileo and
Copernicus.
But, it's like Galileo was imprisoned for heresy because of his discoveries within the scientific community.
And why did the church do that? So because change. And this is not what we understand. This is not our worldview. And when we change a worldview of something in a community or a church or a country, it really is more significant. That's why the book by Kuhn is, it's about the structure of scientific revolutions. It's about science changing their mind about the geocentric worldview, or the sun being the heliocentric worldview, or the flat Earth view versus the round Earth view.
Right.
It changes a lot of science.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to accept certain things like that?
I think it's probably built within us. We just can't change everything that we believe at the drop of a hat. Some of the things it takes time. It takes sometimes a generation.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're trying to do at Suncoast is help people make this transition, but it may not be as easy as we think, and it may take a while to get people to transition. But I think my kids have already transitioned faster than I did. I think your kids will transition faster than you did to this place. But how do we create a worldview or accept a worldview that explains a lot of unexplainable things? And I think that's important. When we used to use the weather god, for example, we used to say, oh, I prayed that it wouldn't rain on our outdoor wedding, and God honored our prayers. It didn't pray on our outdoor wedding.
Right.
And I go, that's just not a worldview that's consistent with me, because I was in that situation in Tallahassee when that happened, and it did not rain on the wedding, but the storm split to the north and south. And people who were getting married north of them a half hour or south a half hour, they got soaked. And the same storm went into Indiana and killed 37 people. So you go, this is not this worldview that God changed the rain or moved the rain out of my forecast for my wedding because I prayed is laughable. It's great if you stay dry. And honestly, when you have a dry wedding, hey, it's good. I'm not complaining.
Right.
But especially if I'm doing the wedding. But it's not consistent, because if that's your God and it's the weather god pattern that's your God, it creates problems. If your thought process, your worldview is that the world is flat or the earth is the center of the universe, it makes us really laughing stocks in Christianity, because rational people who are in the science community, they see all the holes in this. Now, what really is amazing is when science looks at itself and sees holes in it.
Sure. Yeah.
But the thing about science that I commend, its goal is to see the change and accept the change.
Right.
Science is always trying to change, whereas Christianity and those of us in the religious area, We don't want to change. We want to. This is what I was taught. My grandmother taught me, and I don't want to change any of it. But even though the science and even those great academics that say we should, we don't like to.
Well, I think there's a lot of fear that's based around that. I mean, there was Peter Enns has that great book, The Sin of Certainty, and it's this idea that we've grown up in the church to we have to be certain about what we believe.
Yeah,
we have to be certain. We can't question it. We can't change that. And even if you look at the Bible for reference, there's plenty of stories in there of people just being uncertain, questioning God.
Sure.
So we don't really know where this idea of like being certain came from.
No, I'm not. Well, I'm certain where I know where it came from. Certainly, no. I don't think we know, but it creeps itself in, and sometimes in the face of fear, I think we drill down and become more certain.
Yeah.
And I can see in history where that happened throughout all the controversies of the early church. By that I mean the Catholic Church, which was the only church. So when I say Catholic, I don't just mean Roman Catholic. I just mean the early church, the church general. The creeds that were established were often in the face of controversy. The creeds were established in the face of fear. We are afraid. Let's vote on it, or let's have a council determine this is what we're going to say. This is the church's public stance on this. And even though scholars within the Catholic Church were arguing about this, we have to be certain. And this is where the certainty came in. The church declared it. The Pope declared it. It's certain. There's no argument. And for those of us who grow up with an elementary mindset, we like for our parents to tell us everything to do. Remember when you take a test, just tell me what's going to be on the test, and I'll study that, and I'll give you the right answer.
Yeah.
We regurgitate that which we want, and sometimes the church is guilty of that same thing. We love certainty, and we love for people to regurgitate exactly what we want them to say, but it's probably not the healthiest way to understand God or view our faith as it grows.
Yeah, I think it just depends on how you prefer to live your life. Do you prefer to live your life in this this constant fear-based reality, to where it's like I want to make sure that I'm certain about that I believe the right things, so therefore I don't go to hell.
Right.
And I that was a huge paradigm shift for me, like reading Rob Bell's book. And I can't remember the name of it now. It's the one that he wrote about hell. But it was the first time I was introduced to this idea that, what I knew about hell growing up in church is actually not really theologically founded. It's really not anything that the early church really believed in. And that was a huge paradigm shift for me. And it kind of was like part of that first step of deconstruction. And it was like I said, it was a paradigm shift, and it was hard. But the relief that came with that was incredible.
Well, like I explained on the weekend, there are anomalies that happen. These things are unexplainable in our worldview, and all of a sudden we shift, and those anomalies become explainable.
Right.
The reason I don't fall off the edge of the earth when I sail is because the earth is round. The reason the Mars, the orbits of Mars around the earth is inconsistent is because the earth is not the center. The sun is the center. So when you have these changes, it helps to explain some things that were unexplainable before. And one of the goals, I think, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at some things and some traditional theological positions that the church has held and try to move to a more healthy position. Mm-hmm. It's not to say we're right and they're wrong, simply say there's growth between certain stages of the Christian faith or people on their journey, and we are trying to encourage people to get a little farther up the road, because once you shift, there's no shifting back, or at least it's more difficult.
Yeah.
It explains a lot of things, and it makes you more healthy.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think you said these 3 dangerous words on stage that you don't really hear a whole lot of spiritual leaders say. And you said, I don't know.
Yeah.
You admitted, like, a lot of people when they're on stage and they're preaching to their audience, they're saying they're certain. They know everything about the Bible. They know everything about God. And you're like, I don't know. There are certain things that I don't know. And that was a huge confession that I don't know if people caught that or not, but that was big.
Yeah, well, it's honest.
Yeah.
And I think the more you know, the more you don't know. The more you know, the more you realize I was so certain about so many things, and now I'm not, because I give latitude for other people to have different beliefs, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be my way, but on the other hand, I do want to help people grow in their understanding because I think it's healthy.
Yeah.
But I don't have the answers for every person's issue. I don't know. What I don't know, even going back to that Genesis 22 passage, it's a very tricky story. And part of the story is when we're going to get to the mountain. When we get there, I'll tell you when we're there. And then he tells his two servants, hey, we're going to go over and worship and sacrifice, and then we are going to come back. So it's kind of the cards are being shown at that point to say, Isaac really is not going to be. Isaac's going to come back with me.
Yeah.
He's not going to be sacrificed, and that story has so many different nuances to it. I think there's a great truth in there, and the great truth is that Abraham did not sacrifice his son, and he decided to create a new religion based on faith, not based on fear, but not based on sacrificing your children, but celebrating life. And I think that's important. But when we read the story, and there's all the little, why were they on donkeys? Why did he have wood? What was the point of the ram in the thicket? And you get off on these tangents, and I don't think that's really what the story is about. Of course, I have fun with some of those details, but really the story has one main truth, and the main truth has already been mentioned. But it was a big worldview shift for that culture to say, "Well, you mean I can serve a God that doesn't require me to kill my kids?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
I do want to unpack the Abraham story just a little bit more from this weekend. It's jarring from our 21st century perspective to look at a story where a man is told by God that he has to sacrifice his son.
Yeah, it's troubling.
Yeah.
But those of us who read it, you begin to go, this is a story that was told repeatedly. What actually happened, we do not know. This story was probably told by word of mouth for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it wasn't written down by a scribe because there was no one there except Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah.
So what are the details of the story that came from the story being retold? It wasn't embellished. Most human stories are embellished. So what's the point of the story? I think it was trying to say a lot of different things, or the writers are trying to give all these nuances that, if you trust God if you're willing to make this sacrifice, then God accepts that. And I think that is one subtopic of the story. But the greater story, I think, is this new God, this new understanding of God. I look at it and say, well, the God that was saying sacrifice your kid was the Canaanite gods.
And what is that?
That was the culture of that day. The fertility gods are saying you got to sacrifice. So God said you need to come away and sacrifice. The gods were saying that, but then the one true God steps in and says, no, that's not the way I operate. So depends on which God you serve. You can serve that God that says sacrifice your kids, or you can serve this God that says don't sacrifice your kid. And it was a new day for a new faith to begin. This is a story that launches a monotheistic God that cares about his people. But did they put words in his mouth to say it seems that way?
Yeah.
But that's why it's a tough story. I mean, you look at it and you go, oh, I don't know why I said that way. It's interesting, and we can only play off what we think it said and what we think the ultimate outcome is.
Right. And you see a lot of apprehension in Abraham of this idea of sacrificing his son. You told that he's waited all these years for a son.
Yeah.
And now he's being asked to sacrifice him.
It's inconsistent, isn't it? I promise you a son, and as soon as I promise you the son, now I'm telling you to kill it.
Right.
Now, what I think is, one more thing. Then you go to the New Testament, we say, well, God said, don't kill your kid, but in the New Testament, I'll kill mine.
Yeah, and that was one of my next questions is it is relatable to kind of one of our understandings of this idea of salvation. God's sitting there telling Abraham that you need to sacrifice your son, and then he stops him and says, no, we're moving beyond that. But then in our modern idea of Christianity, we require God to sacrifice his son.
Yeah, and I reject that too.
Right.
I mean, I basically think that Jesus was killed. I don't deny Jesus being killed. I don't deny that his life was, he was put on a cross. I don't deny that. But to say that God caused that, I think that's was caused by humanity. I think it was caused by a religious system that was hating what he had to say, and I think it was destructive. And even when Jesus looks up and says, why have you forsaken me? Well, those are great words to try to understand. And we don't know all that these words mean.
Right.
But it seems to be inconsistent to think that, God so loved the world that he sent his only son so that he could kill him and make himself feel better
Right.
about humanity. And the only way humanity is going to be saved is if God kills his own son.
Yeah.
I think that is very pagan in understanding. I think it's not what the early Jewish fathers taught. It's not what the early church was about, and I think it's an application of the church. And
That's
that's
an important thing. Like this was not the early church's understanding of what happened on the cross and with Jesus.
Correct.
This was years and hundreds of years later that this theory, this atonement theory, came to light.
Right.
And it's inconsistent with our understanding of God.
Right. And we can get into the atonement theories another time because
Sure.
it's complex.
Yeah, no, that's a whole other conversation for sure.
But I'll sum it up by saying I don't need an atonement theory. And I don't need one because my understanding of who God is does not require one.
Right.
And that is liberating for someone who's grown up in a traditional congregation like I have, a traditional church that believes in all these atonement possibilities. But to say, hey, God loves me today. He always has. He always will. And I'm one of his kids. And I think Abraham got that, and it'd be great if the contemporary church would get it too.
Agreed. Well, Larry, thank you so much for coming on. One more thing. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and I'm really excited for the Paradigm Shift series. I think it's going to be really good.
Me too. Thanks.